Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's meetup. I know that this is a session I think a lot of us have been looking forward to. I know I myself have been looking forward to this. And this is part of our partner series. So Matt is leading today's discussion, and he is joined by Alan Vickery. So for the past few weeks, Matt and the Ecosystem AI team, we've been looking at AI and financial services, and we've looked at where AI can have an impact in kind of specific avenues. We looked at rewards and loyalty, personalization. Last week, we looked at marketing messages. So we've looked at all these specific avenues, but the one thing that we haven't really looked at is, implementing a whole strategy and seeing how this can roll out throughout an entire enterprise, and see how to turn the vision of what AI can do into something that actually has an impact. So today, that is exactly what Matt and Alan are going to unpack in their discussion. I would like to preface this by saying that this is all from personal insights and experience and doesn't necessarily reflect the entire enterprise or the entire industry, but I know that these are going to be really great personal insights. Before I hand over to them, I want to say this is being recorded, and we love engagement. This is always a space for discussion. So if any comments or questions, please feel free to raise your hand, or if you prefer, you can pop them in the chat. I'm monitoring it throughout, and then we'll stop, ask a few questions, continue. So yeah, that's how it runs. So I'm going to hand over to Matt. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Madison. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to those of you that have been joining us for the last few weeks. I see a few new faces and some familiar ones that I know. I saw Peter popping on. I saw Jürgen popping on. How's it, guys? Good to see you again. And then obviously to welcome Alan. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of this. I really appreciate it. Over the last few weeks or months, we've been running a banking campaign really around how the banking sector, specifically locally, is adopting AI technologies. And when Jay and the ecosystem team, when they run these webinars, they speak very much around their focus, which is building and evolving an incredible state-of-the-art platform where we come in, we're the partner, we're the ones that go to the banks, to the telcos, to the insurers, and sell the platform, deal with the governance, take on the proof of concepts. We have the tricky conversations, and I'm very excited to be having this conversation and chatting to Alan. I've known Alan for quite some time in various roles that I've played over my time, and I think the excitement is, I've had some CTOs, I've had some architects, I've even had an AI Center of Excellence on the show and on the talk. Now I've got Alan, who sits at group level with FirstRand, and again, I am going to put the disclaimer: these are Alan's personal experiences and not the opinion of FirstRand or any of its banks. But the personal experiences I know are going to be very valuable. And for any of us here that is building AI, is talking and having these sorts of conversations, specifically in the financial sector, I think these insights are going to be incredible. So welcome, Alan, and
thank you.
And thanks for joining us. I'm going to jump into sort of AI strategy and execution. Obviously AI has become a boardroom mandate, and I'd like to understand how you've seen that shift specifically in South Africa, and how would you compare it to the global markets and what you've seen there?
Thanks, Matthew. AI for me becomes a difficult topic because it's been led historically more by IT folk and data scientists and less so by the business units themselves. So for me, one of the biggest challenges is actually educating people to understand this is a business imperative that is supported by a tech stack. It is not about the tech stack. So I find there's far too many people who get very excited about it, but actually don't have a tangible business case where they can demonstrate value. And inevitably what happens is people spend a lot of money and then actually have very little to show for it. I mean, if we just go back to the year 2000, when there was all this hype about every single computer is going to fall over, and then they didn't. And then IT as a principle lost a lot of credibility. So you've got to convert it from a hype cycle into tangible things where people will see real business benefit, as opposed to just throwing a lot of money at the technology and hoping you're going to find something. So it really has to be business case driven. But for me to start that conversation, the board and senior executives need to know the art of the possible. If they don't know the art of the possible, you're actually just going to go there and it's all going to be smoke and mirrors. So for me, that starting point is the education. You really have to educate people on what it does, what it doesn't do, the risks associated with it, the ethics associated with it. And depending on the industry that you're in, that has dramatically different implications. If you're a financial services institution, you can't afford to have an AI tool that hallucinates and gives someone credit that they shouldn't get, and now you have a problem with the credit regulator, or that gives them bad advice and they have a financial implication. So I think depending on the industry you're in, some people can fail a lot faster because if X gets something wrong in a bot, they just laugh it off and carry on. You know, a financial institution, you have a banking license, you've got to take it a lot more cautiously than other industries because it can go wrong very quickly.
Makes sense. Do you think we're in a hype cycle? Do you think where do you think we are as South Africans or as South African businesses, and where do you think we sort of fit in on a global scale?
So I'm going to say yes. I still think we're in a hype cycle because there are not a lot of business cases that have been realized that predominantly add new revenue streams. From experience, I see people focusing on risk in other areas, which reduces risk, as opposed to saying, by using the AI, I got 50,000 new customers. Or the customer experience was so amazing that they told all of their friends to move the institution that they are working with. So I said, until you get that flip into revenue generation versus risk management and other areas, I think people won't see it as much as they could. And I also think a lot of the tech is available to everyone. So if I just take Copilot from Microsoft, if everyone has it, it's not a differentiator. It becomes a straightforward ticket to the game. So to try and understand what is commodity that you should be buying off the shelf and just implementing like Copilot versus saying, what is your differentiator so that you can get those customers? Because if I have the same tech stack as every other financial institution, there is no differentiator. It's just a ticket to the game.
That's exactly how I used to sell custom software build. You know, it's like, what do I build? What do I buy? You build your core differentiator, otherwise your competitor can buy it.
Agreed, and also organizations change and they approach things differently. I mean, where I work, massive focus on innovation and on doing things differently to the rest. So if that's your mindset, you have a propensity to build versus buy. Because if I'm buying something and someone else can buy the same thing, there is no differentiator. Like I said, it just becomes a ticket to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see it differently in some of the global markets? Do you think there's a greater maturity, or do you think there's still a lot of hype in some of the global markets as well?
Listen, I still think there's a lot of hype, and it's, you know, no one wants to be left out. So people will rush into something just so that they can be seen to be doing something. You know, if we're not doing something, we're not going to be seen as a leader in something. And for me, a lot of the things that have come out, I don't see anything that special about them. It's a tweak here and a tweak there. But like I said, finding an institution that suddenly said, by using AI, we've doubled our income. I'm not seeing that playing out. For me, it's incremental change. And the other thing, financial institutions are broad. You know, are you seeing small change on fixed deposits versus call accounts versus credit cards versus home loans? Most financial institutions are still very product focused. For me, the real power of the AI is going to be across customer and across segment, not at a product level. But inherently, a lot of them are product focused at their core. And if you're product focused at your core, you'll drive the behavior of solving at the minutiae, not solving at the top.
Yeah. And I would imagine the age-old single view of the customer comes into play there, where it's been, you know, the financial institutions have been trying to get that single view of the customer, and now we bring AI along, and we really want to get a single view of the customer because we want to see what their behaviors are like, so that the credit card customer can be sold a home loan, or be retained because we're worried about keeping them as a customer.
100%. So that single view of customer is key to getting all of this right. And I think every financial institution is pushing that. I mean, it's required for regulatory purposes, for reg reporting, etc. But say 5 years ago, it wasn't looked for behavioral stuff across product. Every one of the product houses would just focus on their product versus someone else's product. I mean, the simple philosophy for me is what you measure is what you get. So if you are measuring at a product level and not at a client level, you can expect that behavior. I mean, that is a massive transition from my experience over the last 5 years, and it's only accelerating.
Yeah. And obviously, each product house has KPI specifically to their product house. Why would you want to do anything grander than that, you know?
And I mean, so that was history. AI is pushing people towards that at an accelerated rate because that is where your sweet spot is going to be. Not within a single product line, but across product lines.
Yeah. Well, then how does planning for AI actually happen at a group level in a large organization? Do you begin with vision, use cases, architecture, talent, you know, especially the fact that we're in this hype cycle? So it's obviously, it's in every conversation. How do you plan for that?
I'm going to say not so easy because you've got to be clear on what problem you're trying to solve for and who you're trying to solve it for. But for me, unless it is truly business case led, it still becomes too much of a hype cycle and not a delivered reality. So it's really about those business cases. You have to have a business case. Otherwise, for me, you're going to throw a lot of money. And again, if you throw that money and you lose the credibility, to get that credibility back is very difficult. Like they say, trust is earned, but because you can spend 20 years earning it and you can ruin it in one day. So for me, you've got to make sure you're having the right conversations at the right level with a use case that is tangible, where everyone sees the value.
Yeah. It's actually very interesting, you know, when you say trust is earned, because we had a lot of debate around how do we get proof of concepts right, and we're very much in that frame of mind now. It's like, great, we believe you, it works, but we don't know if it works here. And can you come and prove that this incredible platform that you've got, you're delivering really great things in production, in other clients, can you show us in our environment? Then you try and go into a banking environment and do a POC on AI, where you've got to integrate into platforms. And you talk about trust. I was chatting to one of our other banking clients, and he said, you have to earn the trust to integrate. And we started coming up with these concepts. And Jay and I were talking about it today, actually with one of your counterparts at the bank, around a concept that we've termed proof of install. And it sounds so menial, like so what, you plug in your platform into our environment. And actually a very important part of that building that trust is this integrates into our systems and it can ingest our data.
100%. That trust is an important one. And remember, the information we have is not, I'm going to say, social media, which people overshare on, and then shouldn't be surprised with the result. Now, these are customers' data set, and we have an obligation before you even get to the law to protect that and look after it and make sure it is secure. So that it becomes difficult to say, here's my model and I can show you what it does, but give me live data. Because if you take the data and you obfuscate it and do other bits and pieces, the results you get is not necessarily going to be the result you did if you actually put it on real data. So it is a tricky cycle to get right, to say how much and for how long to prove what. But it still comes back to things like the lack of control. You have an AI model that people can't actually explain to you 100% how it would get to an answer, but this is now customers of a financial institution. That nervousness does not sit well. It's almost like you want that 100% guarantee it's going to work. Otherwise, what would happen if it doesn't work? So there's a lot of nervousness of getting it wrong. So the amount of governance you go through, given the data sets, etc., I will say is onerous, but it's for a very good reason. Because any failure on this kind of stuff is potentially catastrophic.
It's actually very interesting because we're even talking about manual AI now. Some of the proof of concepts we've gotten involved in because we're not going to talk to customers in live environments and just set the AI free. Is we're containing it to using. So we obviously want to be able to use all channels, because then we know which channel we can reach a specific customer on. But these specific manual proof of concepts is taking the data and pushing it through the ecosystem platform and returning the insights to the contact center. And the contact center are then going, okay, cool. Now I understand a little bit more about Alan, and he is a little bit more exploratory in his nature, and we should speak to him like this. And the actual agent is armed with a much better conversation than he would before, which builds that trust to say, okay, cool, so we got the behavioral science right, and so we grow.
Absolutely. So getting the AI to get to a point, but then having a human being that applies judgment, as opposed to letting the AI go through the whole value chain. So you'll have that capability in your CRM systems, etc. But it's that final leap of faith to say it gets agentic and tells them what to do.
Yeah.
Because then you've crossed that threshold of where does the risk lie? I mean, the example I always use, if you've got AI in a self-driving car and it needs to choose between hitting the granny or the kid, who's accountable? If it has to choose one. So a lot of the things is it gets to a point, but then a human being must apply judgment.
Yeah. Makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about culture, mindsets, and adoption. So culture is often the silent killer of transformation, and we as people are the custodians and the drivers of culture. Growing a young business myself, I know very well that I can't create the culture of the business. I can hire great people that will build the culture of the business. But you're in a very large organization that has years and years of people and culture and a great culture. I mean, I think obviously F&B has been known for its innovation you spoke about. You come from that culture of build, but often these cultures can be that silent killer. How do you treat culture as a deliberate pillar of AI adoption?
See, I don't like focusing on AI as a pillar because it changes it from the culture of the organization. For me, this has to be business-led. So if the business don't have a culture of innovation and doing things, it will die. You can't have the tail wagging the dog. So you've got to make sure right from the top there is that buy-in to experimentation and doing things differently without scaremongering people. I think as soon as you have fear in an organization of the implication to jobs and people's careers, that's when you're going to get resistance, because people then personalize it to themselves and they will resist, not because they don't think it's a good idea, because they look at the immediate impact to them or the fear of the immediate impact to them. So for me, you've got to bring everyone on the journey and be inclusive. You can't leave people out. You can't just educate the board and no one else, because otherwise they will see it as a threat. Because we are going to see a change in where AI does change employment. If you've got agentic AI and it's making decisions, I'm going to say on lower level processes in terms of intellect, those will be automated. So unless you can bring everyone on that journey to retrain people to do higher order jobs, you are going to have a disconnect between the winners and the losers. And if you don't understand that and bring people on the journey, you will get resistance. So for me, that inclusivity is absolutely vital, but there will be winners and losers.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that the fear of job displacement versus the excitement about the automation and the augmentation, because it's a real scare. And obviously when the media get hold of the word AI, they love to drive, these are the jobs that are first to go. I even heard sales jobs are going to go, and I'm like, that's going to be really interesting. It didn't worry me, but I am interested in your opinion around how do you manage that or balance that fear?
I'm going to say very, very carefully. Because as soon as the fear is there, that's when you get the resistance. But if I just pick on Copilot for the time being, if it's doing the minutes and it's doing the action items, you've got to argue that you need less people to do that. Or they need to do twice as many meetings. Are they in that movie, yes or no? Are they going to join you on that journey, or are they going to resist? So as soon as there's that fear about job security, please don't expect people to adopt it. They will buy into the theory, but as soon as they take it to a personal level, that is when you'll get resistance. And that's why that journey of inclusivity is so important.
It leads to quite an interesting conversation, and in fact, I think it was Madison. She had mentioned this saying, and I'm very keen to unpack this a bit. So often when we're chatting to our clients, like you said, we drive most of our conversations with business because we try and solve business problems. But often business feel a little bit out of their depth. They see maths from a company called Excidian. It doesn't sound like a business company. It sounds like a tech company. Oh, it's AI. Okay, we need to bring in the data scientists. In come the data scientists after we built an incredible amount of excitement around a platform that can do a lot of the work that the data scientists already do. And we were talking about the saying, it's very hard to get the turkey to vote for Christmas.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that, and how will you? What sort of advice would you give around working and being inclusive and involving the data scientists to be part of this journey?
See, I mean, it gets back to the previous point where if the only people you engage with is the business people and the data scientist gets told afterwards, by the way, I've moved your cheese, you're not going to get that inclusivity.
Right.
And if people have created a career on creating something and you show something that's better, inherently there's that sense of what I've done is not good enough. So you've got to bring everyone with you, whether it's the business people, the data science people, the IT people, the security people, the governance people, the compliance people. The list goes on and on. And that's why it becomes difficult, because there are a lot of stakeholders.
Yeah. No, agreed. Coming from going back to the sort of the build versus buy conversation, I know you like you mentioned, you very much come from the build world. You're also actually very involved in a lot of putting together offshore scalable builds. With your experience, where do you feel AI comes into it with the build versus buy question?
You shouldn't be building something that is commodity, that is a ticket to the game. So if you take Copilot within Microsoft, don't try and do that yourself. You'll never get the scale that Microsoft has to keep on churning those capabilities out. And like I said, that becomes a ticket to the game. So don't compete where you shouldn't. It's like you don't need to own the cow to get the milk.
Yeah.
You used to, but you don't anymore. So you need to define what is commodity, what's not commodity. And only focus on the things that differentiate you. But at the same time, you don't want to get locked into a vendor relationship and then you can't get out. Because otherwise, you are not in control of your destiny. So it's that control of destiny, your differentiator, but don't reinvent the wheel. If it's there, go and get it. Don't try and replicate it yourself, because then you're focusing on your ticket to the game and you're not focusing on your differentiator. And then it just becomes a waste of your precious resources time.
Okay. So if a platform like an ecosystem platform that gives you a lot of what, I suppose you probably need tons of data scientists, tons of behavioral scientists, and no company could really scale, but allows you to still have that nuance and be able to build newer models and gives you the best of both worlds. Do you think that would excite the data scientists?
Yes. But again, it's convincing people of what is commodity.
Right.
You try and convince someone that their life's work on a certain thing is now commodity and it's not special. That doesn't go down well. People always want to see where their differentiator is, not where they're the same as anyone else. Everyone wants to feel special. So if you're telling them they're not special, they are just commodity, it's not going to land. So it's how do you get them to see that the commodity can be done more effectively by someone else so that they can focus on the differentiator and not the heavy lifting. And again, that's why it's a journey.
Yeah.
You can't go in and tell people. You've got to go and ask them. If you go in and tell them what's good for them, it invariably doesn't land well.
Yeah. I have certainly learned that lesson. Rob, I see your camera popped on. Did you want to ask a question? Because I know you've been very much in many of these conversations.
No, I mean, I was listening to Alan, and I was just trying to like nod my head in, like kind of supporting the statement he was making. But I come from my original degrees in civil engineering, and when I first started working there, computers were relatively new. Maybe 10 years old, but they weren't like adopted like they are today. And the programs you could use to do your calculations, that you would take your day to do your calculation, how you can do and now you can do in like minutes or hours, and it becomes the that was quite a part of a designer's identity. You take all these calculations and be very proud of these 10, 20 pages of calculations they didn't. Now you can just go to a computer and go ding, ding, ding. 10 minutes later, half an hour later, the design's done. But the thing that was important, like you say, about the context and what's your unique differentiators, knowing what to put into the machine to get the stuff out of the machine at the end. That's the differentiator. And machine learning and AI is not going to take that away. We still have to know what goes in, what's the unique differentiator that's going to get us to do, and use the commodities, like you said, that are going to get us there. And I'm translating that into business value. That's the thing that we need to as a group get to.
Yeah, listen, Rob, a fool with a tool is still a fool. And you can use this technology to get to the wrong answer faster, as much as you can get to a better answer faster.
Yeah.
And if you train your model on bad data, guess what? You get to the wrong answer faster. So it's not just about blindly putting data in and trusting an answer that comes out. If people don't have domain knowledge on something, it is just a tool.
Like Jay's favorite example is where he bought toilet paper once on Amazon, and every single time he logs into Amazon, the first thing that pops up is toilet paper. I mean, he bought it once on a Friday night urgently, all of that kind of stuff, all of the things aligned, and now every single time he goes in, it's the only data point that he has. And they're assuming that he's going to buy toilet paper every single time he logs on.
So we have, first of all, from Janine, if you have the journey that you bring everyone along, that often causes more engagement and time to move from point A to B. Do you find that there is a delay on delivery due to that, Alan?
I'm going to say yes in the beginning, because it takes a lot of time and effort to get people on the same page. But it's almost, if you want to fail, don't do that up front. So there's that frustration of trying to get people to see something that a lot of people see, but other people don't. So it's trying to get that single pane of glass, and then you can move fast because you've got that buy-in. If you're doing it to them, they'll feel threatened. And as soon as you have that mindset, at every corner you're going to be told why it won't work and why it can't be done, and you need this approval or that approval, because you haven't been inclusive. But it does slow you in the beginning.
And Alan, given that, would you then say, how would you then say it impacts your ability to get to market and still be innovative and leading? Because, your time to get to market with something new and innovative can often be challenged by your competitors, and, bringing people along on the journey is something that can delay that, because you do want to get the buy-in, you do want to get the cooperation, you do want to get to the positive outcome that you want to get to. However, at the same time, you need to push to be first to market or leading from the front, which is also daunting at the same time. So it's sort of like that balancing act. And my question is around, what do you do to enable that balancing act to still get to the leader, lead the market, but also not cause the internal frustration and fear and rejection? How do you feel you manage that balancing act?
I'm going to say when I figure it out, I'll tell you, because it varies dramatically. It depends on the area, it depends on the knowledge, it depends on the maturity depends on the business strategy. And a lot of it also depends on people's age. You know, if you look at the average age of the people on these calls, it tends to be your younger generation who are have a bigger propensity to adopt technology quickly versus fight it because they don't understand it. So it's a balancing act. I don't think there's one right answer. But for me, unless you get the inclusivity right, you might have a small win here or there. But longer term, for me, it's going to hurt you.
We do have small.
Yeah, another question.
I see SJ's hands up, and I see Vincent, you've also got a question.
I'm going to ask first it's Louis.
Yeah. But what I wanted to say to Vincent, I think that's a bit more technical question, and I'm pretty sure some of the other guys are going to join after their other meeting. So if you don't mind holding that question off until the end.
Okay, so first from Louis, are you thinking of educating employees to use agents, example Copilot, to help people enhance their work or not do the work? This leads to his overall question on driving education on using AI to show people what is possible versus could it threaten their jobs?
Short answer is yes.
Great. And then Vincent.
But that's what I said in the beginning. There's still a lot of water that needs to flow under the bridge before you let something do it for them versus a system to get to an answer more effectively. So Copilot agents, absolutely. Things like Copilot Studio, absolutely. But again, for me, a lot of those are your tickets to the game because everyone else has them. They're not going to be your differentiator if everyone else has the same thing. And I think every financial institution in South Africa has Copilot.
Yeah.
So if you don't, you're missing out, as opposed to you have it and therefore you're the winner.
And then next from Francois, he asks, are there any good examples of banks custom building to truly differentiating applications of AI? Isn't it rather a matter of banks waiting until the applications are commodity and then being slightly quicker or slower than other banks?
So I don't agree. We've got a lot of examples internally where we believe it is a differentiator. If any of you guys bank with F&B, and hopefully you all do, you log on and you click on your account and it shows you information there that is offers that are for you. That is using AI to get to different solutions. It's not just a generic one size fits all. Oh, by the way, why don't you get a home loan for 10 million when you can't afford it? So we've got multiple examples internally, and that will only increase. But the point that Matt made earlier for me is a vital one. The longer your institution's been going, the more systems you have, historically. You have, let's say, a home loan system or a credit card system or a debit card system. A lot of the power of this AI is the data across all of those verticals. A lot of your newer financial services companies have almost a bit of a leapfrog, because their architecture is different, so their time to market can be quicker. So that's where the data strategy is important. But Melissa, I mean, this is not something that financial institutions started yesterday. Like I said, machine learning, even though it's not to the level of your large language models and stuff as it is today, has been a journey. It's not like the bank suddenly woke up and said, oh, cheapers, we need to jump on this bandwagon. But there has to be that level of caution.
And just to add to that, Alan, I know, Rob, you got your hand up, but in fact, I was talking, like I said, Jay and I were chatting to one of the guys in F&B who's actually got a fairly mature ecosystem. They use the platform fairly maturely and have got some really great use cases. And we were talking around onboarding, because onboarding is becoming quite a big use case for us in the AI space. Because we're starting to use agentic frameworks to do orchestration, which allows, using LLMs to start then guiding a KYC process and that sort of thing. And it was quite interesting, even though they've done really great things in the space, he said, that's where I'd like to focus. He said, just there. And it's such a small, I mean, we spoke about product, and now we're like really honing in on a really specific, almost use case level that is such a big problem across a lot of business. And it's not just the banks, because we're doing the same sort of work in the insurance space for claims. I said, well, what's the big challenge? He said, well, we've got all these systems now. So as you onboard, It's how do we get that person to put their email in? And some people just won't put their email in. So it's around getting the recommender to, okay, cool, this person's very intentional and they are not, do not put more work in their way, otherwise you won't onboard them. Put the bare minimum and then get them to move on. Where you might have somebody a little bit more apprehensive who'll be like, okay, they're willing to put the time and the hard yards in and then take them to the next part of the journey. And then obviously the systems will then start pulling through.
I mean, you guys will maybe know if you bank with F&B, which Vincent Kelly doesn't. That, we've been able to onboard people with selfie. Oh, good. We've been able to onboard people with selfies where we do the full facial recognition and link it to like Home Affairs to actually check it's you. So that we've been doing for quite some time, but it's the extent to which you take it.
Yeah.
And the risk if you get it wrong, identity theft. We've been doing scanning of green ID books. I don't know how many people know there are actually 3 different types of green ID book.
No.
So you actually have to look at all of those to say, is it the person? Has it been tampered with? Does everything actually match up? And I mean, we've rolled that across every single country. And it means Swaziland will have its own and Namibia will have its own. So like I said, this is not new. I think it's just you're seeing the acceleration with the larger language models and the agentic part. It's just that sort of hockey stick that we're seeing rather than saying this is something new. For us, it's not something new. It's just the acceleration.
Rob?
I wanted to ask Alan's opinion on the following statements. You mentioned that, if you don't, most companies have Microsoft, fair enough, and Copilot, so that's just an entry to a game. Do most companies have a dual strategy when it comes to those sort of hyperscalers? I get the feeling that they are. And my question and statement is, how do you then choose between, say, Copilot and AWS's equivalent? Essentially, you're choosing an application, or you're not choosing. You're no longer choosing the AWS or Microsoft. You're choosing the thing that they are good at. How does an organization do that? Because you're going to go through the same, like, oh, I like this one better, and I like this one better, and then somebody's got to make a decision at some stage.
So Rob, I can't speak for smaller enterprises. I mean, we have one of the biggest data centers in South Africa. We use all of the major suppliers. So we use all of them. So it's a case of saying which is the one that is fit for purpose and at which price point. But the most important thing for me is very few people are able to put forward a value for the consumption of the tool versus the cost of the tool. So if you say Copilot is $30 a month, can the person show you where the organization has got at least $30 worth of value? The person say, I'm more productive. But the ability to quantify that into rands and cents doesn't flow through to the income statement. So your finance people are going to say, but here's the cost. And then they say, well, where's the increased revenue? And then you'll have someone say, oh, yeah, I used to work 12 hours a day and now I work 8 hours a day and it gives me lifestyle choice. Yeah, but that doesn't hit the income statement. So for me, almost all organizations are not able to properly measure productivity and see the absolute gain in productivity. They fail. I mean, if you take COVID, everyone was away, and then a lot of companies have said, no, people must come back to the office. Ignoring culture and all those other good things. I fundamentally believe in being with your team to get stuff done. But I think a lot of companies look and say visibility is their proxy for productivity. So if I see you, then I know you're productive, because they don't have a proper measure for productivity. And if you don't, you'll never see the value in the tool. You'll just see the cost.
Are there other questions? Or
Louis had a question, but Alan, you've actually just answered.
Okay.
Okay, there's Vincent's hand.
So like with F&B, when they came with the app, they seemed to like aggressively go into the app, and then it was like quite frustrating if you wanted to do something a bit more of like an old school way. Do you know what I'm saying? Because you couldn't like speak on the phone. They would say go to the app, or it would be like a recorded message that says go to the app, you know. So could you maybe talk a bit about the pros and cons where if someone wants to do, they'll do like, especially like, for example, my gran, she's not going to want to do something that is like a new way just because it's a new way. You know what I mean? So could you maybe talk about the pros and cons of taking this aggressive approach where it's kind of like you lose a whole demographic because that's not the way they do things?
If you take under COVID, we had to shut certain branches, and with load shedding, the branches before we got UPS and stuff in every single branch, etc. Someone would come and want to do something, and then you would say, well, you can do it on the app. So a certain part of it is educating people so that you don't have people coming in who could self-service themselves. What it doesn't take away from is understanding the demographic of your clients. My grandmother's never going to use the F&B app. Okay, so if you take First Rand, unlike certain others, we've not reduced branches. If anything, we've increased branches, but what you find is the branch can be smaller because you are encouraging self-service. So it's getting that balance right between self-service so that you can reduce a footprint, but not ever forgetting that you've got old people, you maybe have uneducated or illiterate people. So pushing them only to a digital channel is not what it's about, but it's getting that balance right. Because once you've taught someone to fish, they will fish. But if they're always going to come into the branch to ask something that they should do on the app, which they have on the app, then you're back to square one. So it's getting the balance right between encouraging people versus, I'm going to say, your experience where it's more of a push than an encouragement.
Nice. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of global delivery and offshoring because you know quite a lot about that. This is quite interesting for me because, you know, from coming from the custom build world, there was always competing with offshore or partnering with offshore, and there's so much incredible talent offshore. How are you seeing partners scale AI and digital capabilities from an offshore point of view? Is that happening? Is that a possibility? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So for me, there's a big distinction between offshoring and outsourcing. The entity that I manage on behalf of the group is a first-rand entity. They are first-rand employees. They are simply an extension of a team that is just not geographically in the same location. And one of the biggest things that taught people that can work was COVID, because everyone had to work from home. You couldn't see the person and smack him over the head, so you had to find different ways of working. Gone are the days of the old-fashioned VC. The tooling set that's available now is far more collaborative. But then you need to make sure you get your culture right. As soon as it becomes us and them, it's not one team. As soon as there's, let's say, an SA stand-up and India stand-up, not one team. So the focus is on the culture, as we discussed earlier, the ways of working, and the collaboration. Then whether there's a vendor in India or not, that for me is completely separate from the fact that the teams that I have in India, they are first-rand employees. They are not a vendor, they're your own people.
Okay. And are you finding that they're taking on AI technologies and driving out business use cases in AI? And how does that look from that side of things?
Listen, I find the Indian market 10 times more aggressive than anyone I've ever seen, because the level of education and the volume of people with a skill. If you go and say, I want, let's say, a Java skill, unless you almost put in the thing that you need a PhD and you need this and you this, you'll get 20,000 CVs. They qualify more people a day in Mumbai than Africa has ever in IT skills. So you've got the volume of skill and you've got the work ethic given the ambition of the people. I mean, in India, if you don't give someone work to do, they'll resign because they can't go home and say to mum and dad that they sat there and they weren't productive without even having a job to go to. And I'm not saying that's prolific across the whole area, but that's the kind of skill set and talent that you want to attract. The ones that really want to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there certain practices or disciplines that you, besides sort of joint stand-ups and collaborative sessions? Are there other practices or disciplines that allow those teams to become an extension or part of your teams? And what are those?
Yeah, listen, it's all about the culture. As soon as you have an us and them, it's not one team. And the same way we discussed earlier about being co-located for certain things, doing team builds, flying to India, getting the India guys to fly to SA. If your culture breaks down, that's when you're going to get the us and them. If they don't see it as one team, it's an us and them, it fails. So you can't just go and say it's someone 6,000 Ks away and they're out of sight and out of mind, and I only see them on a team call. I mean, I'm in India 6 to 10 times a year for a week at a time. I need to be in country for sort of board meetings and stuff for tax purposes. But I could fly and do the board meeting and fly out. I'm there for, on average, a week at a time to spend time to engage. Because after all, we're all human beings. You're not just an avatar on the other side of a screen. If you have that approach, and if you start by saying, oh, I can get someone cheaper than here or there, you will fail. You never start with cost. You start with the skill and the value and the work ethic. Make sure you've got your culture right. Otherwise, it'll fail. As soon as someone says, okay, but how much does it cost? Then actually I'm not interested in the process, because if you start with cost, you drive a bad behavior.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
No.
Cool.
I did ask one, but then you said it was too technical. There's a technical guy coming later.
It's not too technical. I just know that Jay would be able to answer that very, very efficiently. So yeah, I was hoping that, I know they had a meeting until now. I was hoping that they would jump in at the end of that. But I can get back to you on that.
Should we can give them 5 minutes. If they don't join in 5 minutes, I'm sure someone else can answer it, but I see Diane has a hand raised.
Hello everyone, Shan, hi there. Thank you, Alan, for your time. It is appreciated.
Pleasure.
Alan, I need to ask, and I've had this discussion with Rob, and I've had this discussion with Jay as well. Bringing AI into a country that has got a huge unemployment rate, and there's a lot of people that are scared about bringing it in, whether it's, across banking, across most industries. How have you found, your staff to take it on, to work with it, and obviously not just from an IT perspective now, I'm talking about across the back and saying, sales consultants, call center consultants, and so on. So how have you managed that process? I would imagine there'd be a lot of change management that would come with such a big process. Yeah.
Agree. People focus on process change management and they forget the human beings. For me, fundamentally, every organization is about the human beings more than anything. Yes, you service your client, but you try and be the best that you can to the human beings. And my experience is, if your company is not about the human beings, they will leave them behind. And that's why that inclusivity I spoke to you about is important. But if we look at almost any innovation, you start to see how there are going to be people left behind. And for me, it's less a case of how necessarily educated you are today, because someone has moved your cheese. It's how re-educatable you are. Because unless you can relearn and retrain, and we've seen that many, many times, it's not going to happen. And we see governments like our own force certain industries to say, you may not fill your tank with petrol, because that secures 17,500 petrol pump attendance jobs. Yet the UK, which are the most conservative places, I'll be politically correct, you fill up your own tank with gas. Because they say it's not dangerous, because they're not trying to protect that. For me, it's within an organization, define what your ethos is in your way of working. Sometimes governments will force it. My experience is it's a journey, but inevitably there are going to be some. But your programs internally on retraining people, repurposing people, for me then becomes important. And hopefully you're not in an industry where you suddenly go and say, oh, half my workforce is going to go because of this one thing. I think you're going to have a problem with adoption.
I hear you, and thank you for that, Alan. That's very helpful. Much appreciated.
Cool.
Any other questions?
I see Jay and them haven't joined, so
I'm going ask my sort of favorite closing question. If you could give one piece of advice to a bank or banking executive that are starting their AI journey, whether they're a massive, large bank like the one you work for, or a banking group like you work for, something that you wish you knew earlier, what would it be?
It's the go slow to go fast. That inclusivity of the journey. Because unless you take people with you, for me, it's going to fail. I mean, there's that Zulu saying, I'm going to absolutely bugger it up, but if you want to go fast, go alone. And for me, that typifies this journey. If you don't get that right, you're wasting your time. Because you'll get some quick successes in the beginning, and then the resistance will pick up. And human beings have an uncanny way of preventing you doing stuff if they want to.
Yeah. It's very true. Going back to the data science Turkey situation, I've waited a year for data from a particular client to do a proof of concept, and the data scientist has the data I want. That's very true.
But listen, the most powerful person in the bank is the guy who runs your network. He flips one switch and you're gone.
Alan, this was brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm going to hand back to Madison and to close out, but thanks a ton.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. That was a great session. I know we already got some great insights. Next week, we are also hosting another session. We host these every Wednesday, so please join. Vincent, I do want to say your question on the theory of constraints from the goal. I'm just going to read it out and ask if anyone can answer it. When companies use the theory of constraints from the goal, would AI be able to identify the constraints and how to create capacity? It's an example of that.
So, Vincent, the reason why I held up, I know that Jay knows the theory of constraints backwards and AI backwards. But the thing is that AI is not, we've got to say, AI is not intelligence. It's not intelligence like you and I know intelligence. It's the what's the next best token of what we should say next to each other, which seems like intelligence. So if you're now asking it a question, we should have seen these constraints, therefore show us how to create capacity. That's proper intelligent thought. And I don't think AI, it might give you an answer that looks like intelligent, but I personally don't believe that AI would be able to, this is the problem and here's how to solve it. I personally don't believe that that's true. Has anybody got any other opinions around that?
Listen, the models are taught from data that's from the past.
So, yeah.
And therefore, you can't expect it, by and large, to come up with something new because it's learning from the past. And if your model from the past is flawed, so it'll be. I mean, the one thing we didn't touch on is things like ethics. The model that is fed data that's inherently biased in any way, shape, or form.